And welcome to another video tutorial on Unreal Engine. And this one is gonna continue from my previous video on rendering, movie render queue and sequencer, to give a bit more information on what to do when rendering, primarily, and the rendering settings that we get in this movie render queue. So I'll go through a few extra details, starting with a piece of information that I didn't mention in the last video, and it is what happens if you don't have the movie render queue. So that's going to be in the plugins. Actually, let's step back one step, and just in case, if you click this movie render queue or this clipboard and the movie render queue, you're good, you're set, you're ready to go. But it might be the case that when you click the clipboard, it's going to give you this menu. That's the previous rendering settings, and you can see it's the legacy settings for Unreal Engine 4. The movie render queue is going to give you more options, and is the one that pretty much everybody's using lately, except for a few plugins that could benefit from the legacy one. But in our case, let's go with the movie render queue. Lots of options that you can use. And then we'll go into some troubleshooting to do. So just in case, I mentioned it in the previous video, but it could be that you don't have the still draft, still ultra. Remember that is going to be show engine content, and you need to activate both show engine content and plugin content. Otherwise, it's not going to show you the two options, which are the ones that I would recommend you to start with. It's going to give you a good set of settings that are quite nice and ready to go. But it might be that for some people that don't have the top specs in hardwood for the computer, it might take some time, might be a bit slow, especially sometimes I actually realize working on my laptop that it doesn't have enough power to run the same as my desktop, that I always end up changing a few settings. So I thought I will include that in this video. So the main one that I would change is the EXR sequencer. We can change it to DWAB drop. And this is a compression option. PIZ and ZAP, the ones with the higher quality, and it captures more information depending on how you render. But for the basic settings that I've shown you in here, and just to get started with Unreal Engine, you don't need to go too deep into it. So I would recommend you to go with this to DWA. You can see a bit of the description. It says that it loses some is sort of a lossy compression type of document, and this is in a different way also compressing a bit more than the ZIP and PIZ, but again, it just depends on what you try to do. I would say, especially when you're starting to learn and you're gonna do a lot of tests and see what you want to achieve, go with the DWAP. And once you know, all right, this is what I want to create, you can go with the higher resolution or higher quality lossless compression. So PIZ is the one that I go with, and you can search online for the differences to know more about it. But for the time being, recommended, like I said, for testing for the beginning, the DWAB DWAP is going to be a good option. Now we can go to anti-aliasing. That's the other one that I recommend you to adjust. By default, is going to be just let's go back to the ultra. Yep. To get all the settings. Here's the default. So I'm going to change it to DWAB, and then anti-aliasing. One way that it works, or the basic way that you can think about it, is that the temporal samples are going to be multiplied by the one on the top, that is the spatial samples. And that means the temporal samples is going to be this pixel sample count that is going to be taken in the image and then multiplied by that spatial one. So recommended one, again, especially at the beginning for more draft version or quicker version. I go with 1 and 16, and then I also go into 8, 16, and never go too high with these type of settings, the ones that you get from Ultra and the deferred rendering settings, because it doesn't benefit too much. And I have a few examples that I can show you in a moment. Now, something else that you can keep in mind is if you have effects or particle simulations in the editor or in the project, you might need to do a warm-up count for the engine, and that means that it's going to run the simulation first if you have a few of these frames, and then start the process of rendering, which means it doesn't render at the same time that the simulation starts, which could be that when you render, let's say you have a waterfall and there's some water effects coming down, and if you render exactly at the same time that the simulation starts, it might be that you see a little bit of water at the beginning of the waterfall, but not in the rest. It's just a few particles going down. It's not quite the effect that you want. It's just because of that warm-up count. So any particles effects, smoke, steam, water, are good examples of what could be beneficial of that warm-up count. Be careful, it might take some extra time to process, and also depends on the hardwood, so I would keep it low and see how it goes. You also have the option, just to continue with that warm-up count, to move the camera sequence outside the frames that you're gonna render, and it's gonna do something similar to process the video before it starts. So something else that you can try and see how it works for you. Right, and just to finish off the settings, so from anti-aliasing, game override is basically overwriting the viewport settings that you have. A lot of the times you might have the scalability to epic, depends as well on the hardwood that you have. On the laptop, I probably go with high most of the time. So this game's override, on its default, is gonna just take it all to the maximum of the editor, on the Unreal editor. It's just good to keep it in there. And then high resolution, an interesting one, is the best way to see it is that it's gonna take the image and it's going to divide it in squares, and it's going to do one square at a time to render, and that's the tile count. So in 1, that is the default, and it's going to do one big square for the entire image, but you can then divide it in more and more. So that could save some power in the computer if it is not too powerful. It's going to render smaller portions, which it can help with a crash error of, it is called Windows timeout or GPU timeout. And this is one way to avoid that issue. So if your computer crashes quite often when you are doing renders, you might want to try this. I would go to first just augment it one at a time. Let's start with 1. So next one that you want to try, 2, and see which one works better. Yep. So keep in mind, read the settings. It could depend on the hardware that you have, a few options. So just being careful. It also could cause that because it's doing squares at a time, let's say it's divided by 4. So it does those 4 separately. So you might see some seams, and you can adjust those with the overlap radio and see what works better for you. So a few things to be careful about. So, but recommended start with 1. This would be the last one that I adjust only if I see that error of timeout, GPU timeout on Windows. So if you have a little window that it pops up after a crash and it says something about GPU, that might be the case. So that's the only time that I increase that one. And the other option to change is going to be the resolution. By default, it's going to be a bit higher than the traditional 4K, so 3840 by 2160 is the 4K resolution. And you're going to see as well when you render, if you go with the default, you might see 2 bars at the sides of the image, black bars at the side of the image, and it's just because of that resolution proportion. So 3840 is the next one that I change. Now we have the situation of rendering one image or still images and rendering a sequence like we have in here. And I can play this sequence that I have. Let me just move this to the side and let's play this sequence. And you can see how the camera moves. Play slowly. And something that is going to happen with the default in the still ultra is that is still images. So its default goes into rendering 2 frames just to have a safeguard. And in other options, or when you want to do the sequence, the full sequence, you need to override that, or just change it to deactivate the custom playback range. So when this is checked, it's gonna take the frames that you have in here, which is also useful. Something that I did for the examples is that I have all these sequence, but I want to have a few shots in the middle, like in here, for example. And I can see that I actually want to render this frame only 100. So I can go to that start frame, do 100 and 101. And this means that it's going to render that 100 frame that we have in there. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want to do still images, this is where you go. If you want to do the entire sequence, once you deactivate that option, it's going to do from 0 to the end of this option in here, that is 150. So keep that in mind. So he's going to basically do the entire sequencer. All right. And with those options, I can do a render. Let's see how long it takes. Have this in 8:16, so it shouldn't take too long. Let's see what it does. Once I do, I lost my movie render queue. Here it is. And let's do something else. Always remember to change the placement of the renders. So let's do that one, accept, and render local. All right, and now that that's done, I'm gonna bring some options. Okay, let's bring all of the, okay, where did you go? Sequence. Excellent. So this is what you get at the end of the rendering. As you can see, from 0 to 149. That is the entire sequence. And something interesting to keep in mind is EXR, and it's a rather specific type of format. So not every program is going to open it, and the default Windows images is not going to open it. If you double click and you have Photoshop installed, you're going to immediately open to Photoshop. If you don't have Photoshop, it's not going to give you any options, depending on what programs you have. There you go. I do have one option that, one application that is called Quick Look. And that's what I'm doing right now. Pressing the spacebar gives me a preview, and that application has the option to open EXR files. So yeah, a really quick way to check the different files without waiting for Photoshop to open. All right, that's what you get in there as a sequence. So keep that in mind, and then you can combine them in After Effects, which I'll show in a moment, or DaVinci Resolve, depending on what application you use. Right, now a few settings that you can adjust, or a few options I would say that I would give you, depending on the time is, or depending on the hardware that you have on the computer, that you can go to 1:16, and that should give you a good result. I would actually click again, depending on what you have. In here, I don't have any particles. I'm going to keep it in 0, so it's a bit faster. Yeah, if I have it like that, 1:16, and all the other ones as it is, it's going to save you some time. So that's something that you can keep in mind. And I have a few examples. Let's bring those here. Here we go. On the different settings, I'm just going to show you what I did with each one of them. So if we go to this one, areas. Let's switch to Dells so I can have the settings. So I have the Ultra, I have it here, Fast. This is the one that I did with these settings, 116. And this low one is the highest that I normally go, that is 16 and 16, the default from the Ultra, just to see the difference. And you're gonna see, again, not much difference, really small details, almost imperceptible in this scene that I have. So just keep an eye, if you see some jagged edges in the corners of the geometry of the elements that you have in the scene, that's when you can increase the sample count. And again, I would go keep it in 1 for the spatial sample count, and then start to increase the temporal sample count. Normally go from 8 to 16 to 32, and maximum that I would go on 64 to do with these still ultra settings. All right, let's do really quick. I'm gonna open this one up, then the slow, that is the 16 by 16 in the anti-aliasing. I'm gonna come around here, and it's a bit of a challenge to see the difference. Like I said, it's not gonna be much of a difference, depends on the geometry that you have. You might see a bit of difference in here, that it might be a bit smoother. See if we can see it. But again, it's not going to be much of a difference. So as a recommendation, you can always go, always start with the low option for the sample count. There is 1 and 8, and see how it looks. If you see those jagged edges, 16, and increase it a bit more. And yeah, all right, that's for the still ultra settings, just to have, that's basically using the Lumen lighting from Unreal Engine, or the lighting that you have in the viewport. So right now I have it as Lumen, which is the one recommended to use for Archviz in these fast paced type of situations, especially with some movement. Lumen is going to be the best option. Right. And now the other option that I have, or that I want to show, is path tracing. And that's going to clean, the main difference is going to be the, actually mainly is going to be reflections, translucency, and in some cases the shadows are going to be a bit different. So I do have as well the 2 options, path tracing. So let's go with this one. Is the high from the ultra, still ultra settings, and I'm gonna go with the defaults from the path tracing. Here we go, and you'll see a few more difference in here. There you go. You can see the shadows a bit more defined, a bit more contrast as well in some areas, or more balanced contrast. You can see in here has a strange extra shadow when it's not supposed to be there. Especially reflections are going to look a lot more nicer. So Lumen has the situation on, depending on the settings that you have, that the reflections are going to become a bit noisy. So that's what happens with Lumen. You can see how the path tracer is going to clean that a lot more. And you can see as well in those 2 objects, and in the back as well, in the window. You can see there's a lot of artifacts when it comes to anything that is translucent or reflective. So path tracing is a really good option to do when you have those situations. And now to do those options, there's 2 ways. One, the first one, well, if you want to preview it, you can change to path tracing in here. But if you want to render with the path tracing, you have to come here to the settings and then change the deferred rendering. I'm gonna delete that one, to the path tracer. And the path tracer is going to be controlled in 2 places. So all the settings for it to adjust the quality. You're not really going to change much in here. Again, For the basics, there's a few options that could be nice to adjust, but something to learn a bit more, maybe a future video. But for now, we're gonna go with the basic settings, which you can find in the post-process volume for the entire world, or for the viewport and the entire level. And you can search for path, and you're gonna find the path tracing. So the defaults are gonna be basically as if these are active like this. And an interesting option that is active by default is the denoiser, and which is really good when you don't have, oh, that's not the one that I'm looking for. That's the option that sort of cleans the image. It's sort of the process of path tracing. It's bouncing light in a lot of places. That's what happens when you click the rendering. You can see all of those little particles appearing everywhere. Fireflies as well are cool. And that's the noise. That's what is denoising when you have this active, and it makes the rendering process quite fast, but it could change the quality of a few objects. So let's just to show you that difference, I'll have this that is high quality. Actually, this one, it's not the best, the default. Here we go. And then I'll show one without the denoiser. So no denoiser. Here we go. And let's go closer. You can see all of those artifacts that appear. It's not the best image. As you can see, just by activating the denoise, it's going to take that image and clean all of those particles. It does a really good job. But you can have some spaces or some areas that the image or the geometry, especially some details in the textures, might get lost. Let's go to one that has really high resolution without the denoiser. Here we go. We can see a small detail that I like is you can see that shadow. It is separated by a slightly bit, but you can see how it just smushes it in. And that's just the denoiser processing that is going to try to smooth out all of those particles, so it creates that effect. So a few small textures might look a bit different. There's a few artifacts in here as well that you can see is not as pronounced in here. Again, depending on the settings, if I go really, really high with the settings, I would get perfect textures in there. So again, all depending on what you want to achieve. I'm gonna deactivate that. And the ones to adjust in here is two things. One, with the default, it does a really good job. So I'll give it a try first and see how it looks. And then you can increase the, especially the sample per pixels to have a bigger quality. It is recommended to go by increments of, I always remember as 64. So I'm just going to multiply that for 2, 3, 4 times, just keep multiplying it to get an appropriate value for that. But once you increase that one, keep in mind it's going to increase the time of the rendering as well. So that's the main reason why it might be better, especially for sequences that you have multiple frames rendering, that you keep the denoiser active and you have some lower resolution, or lower sample per pixel and lower maximum bounces. Right, and that's for the post-process volume, which is going to affect the entire world. So, but you also have the option, and this is the one that I would recommend you to adjust, is the camera will have the same option of path tracing, the same settings. Again, by default is going to be these ones, and this is actually the ones that the movie render queue is going to take. So the post-process volume is for the editor for the entire world, and the camera settings are going to be, let's close that one. If I click the cameras, then I get those, and these are the ones that the movie render queue are going to take. So depending on those settings, it's going to render those in here. Now, the other option is to, if you want the highest quality, which means the noiser might need to be deactivated. You increase the maximum bounces and sample per pixels, and then you also need to increase, and this is the most important one, I would say, and the temporal and spatial sample count. So I normally go for really high quality, 64 by 64, and that is the settings that I have for this render, which is in here, and this is going to be the defaults. So let's see a few of the differences. Which again, the denoiser does a good job, so it's not many differences here and there. We can see that shadow, there's a bit more definition in this as well. So you can see here it's kind of smush and spread in a strange way. So the reflections, again, reflections and translucency are the main ones, or the main reason to make the path, to use the path tracing. So keep that in mind. If you don't have that many reflections, might not be worth it to spend the time to render in that type of settings. So give it a go. Again, first, I would recommend you to start with the still ultra settings, and then, depending if there's a few artifacts with those type of reflections, shadows, and translucency, you go into the path tracer. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is the presets. So remember that you can save any presets. So if I have, for example, this one that I want to do with the path tracer, I already have these settings, and it goes immediately to the ones that I normally use. So if you do save as preset, you can save that, and you can even copy this to different projects. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, let's just quickly go into how to combine the images. So to combine the images, the renders from the sequence, you can take them into After Effects, DaVinci Resolve. Those are the ones that I showed in the previous video of the movie render queue and sequencer. And you don't need to do anything to the images, just keep it as it is. Just make sure they are all in one folder. And I'm going to show you here in After Effects. You can, this is just a new project, haven't changed anything in the interface, and you get the project default section on the left side. You can right click, it's going to give you this menu, click import, then click multiple files, and go to the folder, and you can select an image, and you get the option in here of open EXR sequence. So make sure that that one is active. It normally recognizes it and activates it by default. And then you click import, and it opens up the window again, just in case that you need to import more, but that's it. Now you have that sequence, I can move it down here and play the video. Now, I want to show as well a bit of the difference between this one and which is the ultra settings from the still ultra that I mentioned. And let's do multiple files. Let's go to the path trace settings. So OpenEXR, import, that's done, and I have now one that is the path tracer, which should be which one is it? Here, that one. And I'm gonna move it into this one so we can compare them together. There you go. So I'm just gonna zoom in to see some of the differences, and let's move a bit forward. And this, especially here, is when you see the anti-aliasing into effect. So when there's movement, the information gets compressed a bit more. So you see some of those artifacts I mentioned. If you see jagged edges, this is what I meant. So the anti-aliasing, if you see too many of this, that's when you can increase the anti-aliasing to help with that error. Now, again, it depends on what you want to achieve, because that's zooming in really close into the image. You might not see it. So this is if the default 16 by 16 in the sample count for the ultra settings, and this one is 32 and 32 with some high quality in the path tracing settings for the maximum bounces and sample count, pixel sample count. And for differences, well, one thing is rendering the ultra took, if I remember correctly, 50 minutes. And for the path tracer, it took about 45 minutes, about almost 50 minutes, closer to an hour. You can give it a go, again, depending on the settings, to render. So for like 5 seconds, an hour sounds like a good number. And yeah, you can see, especially in the colors and the shadows, the reflections are going to be really nice in the path tracer. So this is the ultra. You can see again a few artifacts in the shadows, and now this is the path tracer. She cleans up those quite nicely, and that's all you need to do. That's how you bring then the sequences, and you can edit them and control them a bit more. Again, plan carefully what you want to do. In this case, I didn't need to do too high in the settings for the resolution because I'm not going too close into the details, so I can adjust it to take less time. And then if I want to really go high quality, I can keep increasing those numbers that I've mentioned before and see what you can achieve. So, all right. And with that, this is the end. So I'll see you all in the next video.